Assalamu alaikum. Hello, I'm Dr. Faria Bukhari from Pakistan Party. I'm the chairperson, and I would like to talk to you about the United Nations Human Rights Council's recent session in which the issue of Kashmir was brought up by both Pakistan and India responded in a very belligerent way, as usual, declining to have a plebiscite as decided by the United Nations many years ago when Nehru was still alive. There was a heated debate between the Indian and the Pakistani diplomats, while the United Nations Human Rights Council failed to deliver justice to the victims of oppression that the Indian army has imposed upon the Kashmiris for now 70 years. And this is not the first time that such a thing has happened. In every other United Nations sessions that are headed by the UN, most highly profiled diplomats, we do not see any significant outcomes except for a heated debate in which India decides not to accept its war crimes, even though the war crimes have been written up many times by independent, neutral resources. And even though India has always declined to give the United Nations the authority to even enter the area of the crime for monitoring, while Pakistan has always given United Nations full access for monitoring, India has always refused to give them access to the scenes of the crime or to be able to talk to any local Kashmiris to find out for sure what exactly is going on in their lives. And what we have are, in terms of resources, we have Amnesty International that has written up many times, and when the pellet injuries happened, Amnesty International did start a campaign. They did a social media campaign as well, and they did try to address the issue, as a result of which the protesters started to get crowded outside the Amnesty International's offices, harassing them, harassing their activists within India to the point that they had to close their office. So this is how bad it is, that if a humanitarian agency tries to address the human rights violations happening within Kashmir that is occupied by India, they are bullied, like Amnesty International, like the United Nations itself. The United Nations is not allowed to enter this conflict zone and gets bullied in each and every session, where the whole thing is wrapped up and thrown in the face of the spokesperson of the United Nations. When we talk about the plebiscite, and Rabi was talking about the plebiscite, and the response that the Indian diplomat gave was so out of line and so irrelevant. It's incredible how the Indian government is training its diplomats, because there is absolutely no rationale in all their allegations. There is no proof of Pakistan government's involvement either in Osama bin Laden being found in Abbottabad. There's no proof. Give us proof. Where is the proof? Where is the evidence? There is no evidence. Or the Mumbai attack. In fact, there is now tangible evidence about involvement of India itself in the Mumbai attack. The Indian government wanted to create a false flag attack so that the Indians felt a repulsion against the Kashmiris, against the Pakistanis, to the point that this whole campaign to slander us and then also to create a case for the ongoing human rights violations in Kashmir against the Kashmiris. So this is why they did the Mumbai attack, because they wanted to slander Pakistan all over the world. They needed an excuse not to allow a plebiscite to happen. And this is the excuse they were able to produce as a false flag attack. There is no evidence of Pakistan's involvement, Pakistan government's involvement in the Mumbai attack. We have been playing very defensive. In fact, there is 100% evidence of Indian involvement in the APS attack that happened in Peshawar when more than 150 children were killed by Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan that was funded by Ajit Doval. And Ajit Doval openly, publicly accepted this fact that these people are mercenaries. You just have to match what they're asking for, what the other side is giving them. You just give them more money. And this is what he said, that he just matches their demands and gives them more money, buys their mercenary action, buys their terrorism, and gets Pakistani children killed like this in APS. This is terrorism. India has been doing terrorism against Pakistan on Pakistan soil for years now. And how can it have the audacity to call us terrorists in the United Nations session, human rights session, when it itself has perpetrated acts of terror against the Pakistani civilians? The same thing in Balochistan. BLA, what is it? It is a terrorist organization. It is killing civilians. Every time a politically inclined organization decides to pick up weapons and start killing innocent people, it is no longer peaceful, plain activism. It is terrorism. BLA is a terrorist organization, and who is funding it? Kulbhushan Yadav testified that India has been funding BLA. India has also been planting the insurgency in Karachi. There have been tangible evidence of Raw's connection with MQM. And what did MQM do? It was categorized as a tier 2 terrorist organization by the immigration services of US, to the point that even the activists could not get visas to US. There was a time when this happened. Why? Because they were known to plant terrorist attacks within Karachi. They had connections with Raw. So who is doing the real terrorism? Who is killing innocent people in Kashmir? The Indian Army is. Who is killing innocent people in Pakistan? The Indian Army is, through its funding of banned factions. Who is killing people in Afghanistan? The Indian Army is, RAW is, just to destabilize the environment, just to incriminate falsely Pakistan, just to create a bridge, a drift between the Pakistan and Afghan relationship, just to alienate the world against Pakistan, just to portray us negatively in front of the world, when we are the ones who have sacrificed 20,000 of our Pakistani soldiers in the war against terrorism, not India. Now, this is what Andrabi should have responded when this happened in the United Nations session. He should have said that we are the ones who sacrificed 20,000 soldiers in the war against terrorism. We are the ones who have sacrificed 100,000 people, civilians, in the war against terrorism. We are the ones who have sacrificed more than $100 billion of revenue in the war against terrorism. How dare you call us a terrorist on an international platform without any evidence, without any proof? How dare you? We have facts and figures. What do you have? You have nothing. You do not have the soldiers who have been killed in the war against terrorism. You do not have any martyrs who've been killed in the war against terrorism. You do not have any civilians. You hardly have any civilians compared to how many people in Pakistan have been killed, sacrificed in the war against terrorism. How many people have been sacrificed in India in the war against terrorism? Hardly negligible. So how dare you call us a terrorist in the United Nations session? And this is what I feel. This is my response to the Indian diplomats who call us a terrorist in front of the world in a United Nations session, that if you're going to continue to wrap up the whole thing and throw it in the face of the United Nations spokesperson as us being terrorists, trying to dodge the question about the plebiscite that had been decided all these years by no one else but Nehru, who was your representative, then the end result is going to be war, unfortunately. Because if we are not going to see any kind of activity from the humanitarian agencies, if we see so much paralysis of all humanitarian agencies, including the United Nations Human Rights Council, including the Amnesty International, who has been literally bullied by India, and including the Human Rights Watch, including Code Pink, including BDS, including all the leading humanitarian organizations, if you're not going to see any kind of response from them to try to address the current ongoing human rights violations happening in the Indian occupied Kashmir, if you're not going to see the world respond as it should to try to end these human rights violations, then we will have to come forward as Pakistanis, as humans with a conscience, to try to put an end to these human rights violations, even if we have to go to war against India. So this is something that all the humanitarian agencies should understand, and this is something that India should understand itself, that it will be a reluctance to confront Pakistan and the world on your human rights violations in Kashmir that is going to lead your country with 1 billion people to a nuclear war that could have been avoided had you had common sense to address these human rights violations the way they should have been, the way the International Court of Justice calls for them to be addressed. So this is the point that everybody needs to understand, including all international platforms, all global leaders, all humanitarian agencies, that if you guys are not going to do your job, which is to end human rights violations in Kashmir, then Pakistan will have to do what it has to do, which means going to war, face to face, combat war to end these violations. Look at Syria, what is happening in Syria. US invaded Iraq in the name of trying to bring freedom and liberty to Iraq and to liberate Iraq from the clutches of a dictator, Saddam Hussein. US invaded Libya under the same disguise, like, oh, they are imprisoned, they are in the clutches of a dictator, we have to liberate them, we have to free them. These are Kashmiris undergoing 70 years of oppression, 70 years of war crimes inflicted upon them against India. And if we decide to invade the Indian occupied Kashmir, which is technically a Pakistani territory, as contracted to us in 1947, there should not be any eyebrows raising, there should not be any voices of concern, because if US can invade Libya, Iraq, to try to deliver freedom and justice and liberation from a dictator under false information of weapons of mass destruction, we have human rights violations happening right in front of our eyes in Kashmir, written up by leading humanitarian agencies of the world, with documented evidence. There are unlabeled mass graves. There's so much of evidence buried in Kashmir to prove India's war crimes. Why would you stop us from going to war against India to put an end to the plight of the Kashmiris, who are having to suffer so much oppression, so many atrocities, when the world remains silent? So please do not blame us if a war happens, if a nuclear war happens between India and Pakistan, because you guys failed to do your job. You decided to go for a party after the United Nations Human Rights Council session. You actually went to a dance party where you spent all your time dancing around as if you had already solved all the conflicts of Yemen, the conflicts of Syria, the conflict of Kashmir, you had taken care of the Rohingyas. And this party was apparently funded by the Saudis and the Americans. So if you guys are going to fail to respond to the human rights violations happening in Kashmir, do not be alarmed if Pakistan goes to war against India. Because if nobody else is going to do that, we are going to have to do it. We are going to have to put an end to the human rights violations happening every second against so many Kashmiris by the Indian army. Thank you very much. Bye.